I'd like to welcome you all here today to meet my very special guest, Helen Ellis. Now, Helen is a distance family expert. She speaks from both professional and personal experience. She and her husband are parents to 4 children. Currently overseas, she has 3 of those children and 4 out of 6 grandchildren. She's spent 20 years as a distance parent because her brood has travelled and lived all over the world, and 30 years as a distance grandparent. I'm going to have to pull out my notes here to tell you the number of countries that her children have lived and worked in. They are England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Sweden, USA, Thailand, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Senegal, South Sudan, and Pakistan, all of which are many hours travel from little old New Zealand at the bottom of the world. So that's Helen's personal background. Professionally, she's worked in travel and events management. And a couple of years ago, she gained an MA in anthropology, and her research topic, unsurprisingly, was distance grandparenting. And she took advantage of the lockdown in New Zealand last year to turn her research into a fascinating book, which has just been published. And I'm going to ask you, Helen, just to hold up your book for 1 second to show everybody. So this book is now available to anybody who wants to buy it. It's either online or also the good old hard copy if that's what you prefer. But anyway, Helen's going to talk about the broader topic of distance parenting for us today. So thank you for joining us. The first question I'd like to ask you, Helen, is really from me. When I was an expat many years ago, I was obviously involved in a distance family, but it's a concept I'd never heard of, and nobody gave me any strategies for how to do it. We just muddled through. Do you think that situation has or is changing? And what do people need to know about distance families?
Well, it certainly is changing. I mean, we all know that globalization has been a gigantic force, very much responsible for so many people deciding that they want to work and travel abroad. And COVID has become the great disruptor of that activity. It's really turned this whole distance familying thing on its head. I have a saying as a parent, whenever there are surprises in my life, I go, they never told me about that at the antenatal class. Well, distance familying comes into that category, and COVID does as well. Much has happened for all generations of families separated by distance. So much of it for all of us, all the different generations, is experienced in what I would call sometimes a quiet, lonely void. I want to bring this void out into the open, not in a open the can of worms kind of way, but in a mature way where we can each learn how it is for the other. So my grandparent book, the first book that's out now, is the first of a 3-part book series. And the next 2 books will be Being a Distant Son or Daughter, which are mainly those of you that are listening today. And then the 3rd book will be Being a Distance Grandchild. I'm encouraging every generation to read every book. As an example, for those of you that are traveling or living overseas, for many, guilt is one of your greatest emotions that you experience, the guilt of the left behind family. But do your parents know that? Do the grandparents know that? I want to be the one to tell them so they understand that. So once we've all acquired this information about how it is for the other, empathy is generated. And empathy is a good thing for distance families.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, I mean, and you also bring me to my mind another question, which relates to both empathy and something you mentioned earlier, which is COVID. I think we're all having to empathise a lot more, given that the extremity of situations that people are facing around the world, and for many of us, that's members of our own family. So, what extra challenges has COVID thrown up for distance families, and what strategies can you suggest for people to address those additional challenges they're facing now in maintaining family relationships?
I think the challenge it's thrown up is for most distant sons and daughters who've travelled overseas, one of the lines in the back of their head was always, we're only 24 hours away from home. That was always a thought that was there. And now for most, we're not, or it's pretty dodgy right now. And that means that's all that's left for all of us is the communications that we can have. And we've lost those chances for those visits. The visits were the anchors in between everything else. And that anchor is no longer there. So we're kind of a bit adrift and it's not that much fun. So my thought is, how can we make the communication that we can have, video, text, email, whatever, as rich as possible? Are there any things that you could be tweaking to make it richer? So I've come up with a few strategies that I've started to notice are worth thinking about. And maybe one or two of these may ring a bell with the listeners. First one is, you can't ring a 2-year-old. If you have a young family and you're overseas, your parents, your grandparents, they can't dial up to the toddler. So it needs to be your responsibility most of the time to initiate communication. Your parents and grandparents want to chat. They'll do anything. They'll get up at odd hours of the day or whatever it takes, but they don't want to be a nuisance and they don't want to disturb you at a time when, families are families and they understand that. So you can't ring a 2-year-old. The second strategy is what I call soft routines versus random potluck. Soft routines is what you kind of figure out after a while, that you sort of figure out that, well, every Sunday night we'll chat with the family at home. That's a soft routine. It kind of happens, it evolves, and most week it comes about. The random potluck is just dialing up and hoping for the best. My question to you is, what do you prefer? Do you like having it organised most Sunday nights that you chat? Or do you love it just dialing up and hoping for the best? But most importantly, what do the folks back home think? Have you ever asked them? Do they like the regular, they can count on it kind of calls? Or do they love it with the random potluck ones? As an example, with the random potluck, I love them as well. My family, if they do it, it'll always be in my morning. They don't know. Well, if they've read the book, they're not used. When they've read the book, they know. But I don't organise appointments in the morning just in case they have a random potluck call. I want to be here. So it's amazing what you do to make those random potlucks work. Number 3 strategy is quality versus quantity. Are you a person who likes to have your laptop sitting on the kitchen counter, chatting to your mum or your dad while you're getting dinner ready, and the world's going by and the kids are coming and going and the phone might be ringing? So it's kind of messy, but you're all there. Do you like that, or do you prefer to sit down with a cup of tea and have a proper conversation and a proper catch up? And what do the family at home think? What do they prefer? Have you ever asked them? Once you know that answer, you can make your communication just so much more meaningful and effective. Number 4 strategy is what I call pretense. We're fine. When you ring home, do you say, how are you? Like they ask in the shops when you walk in, how are you? And then carry on to the next thing. My suggestion is that you say, how are you? Full stop, zip up and wait. And they will probably say the same thing. Oh, we're fine. And then do it again the next time. How are you? Full stop, zip up, wait. Oh, we're fine. But the third time you do it, they might say, well, actually, we went to the doctor this week and ... And the same for you. Are you telling the folks back home that everything's fine when it's not? We're all actually tougher than we all think the other is. And I think a lot of truth can be really helpful. And so it's good to tell the others that when we're not all that fine. Number 5 strategy, group versus one-on-one. Group calls, video chats, everybody there are fantastic. Lots of laughter, lots of, you have celebrations. They're wonderful. We've just had a virtual wedding. We had 44 people a week ago in our breakfast on a Sunday morning when our son got married in the States. And it was amazing. I was so pleased we did it. But it's not as effective for the communication as a one-on-one call is, though, a wedding's totally different, I do accept. So my question here is, group calls, do you like the group calls or do you like the one-on-one chats? And importantly, what do they like at home? Do they like the group calls or do they like the one-on-one chats? As an example, I have one granddaughter that's always lived here, and I've done years and years of picking up and dropping off from school and kindy and all that sort of thing. We've had fabulous conversations in the car, totally different conversations from what we would have with her around the dining room table if the family's there. Are these the sorts of conversations that you're missing out on, or your parents could be missing out on by having more one-on-ones? Number 6 strategy, I call it being on stage. A lot of people don't like the video camera. They hate being in front of a camera, but they'll never tell you. They kind of hover in the back when you have a group call. They never plonk themselves on the couch. They want to communicate, but they hate the camera. So what's the suggestion? You might be one of them. Have you got people at home that are like that? Have you thought about their personality? What's the solution? Have other ways of communicating that become the norm. So just send that person an email every 10 days, a good chatty email. And it means that the next time there's a video call, they might have the luxury of saying, no, I don't need to chat today because we caught up by email yesterday. Fuel for them. So when you aren't that kind of person, it's hard to understand. But when you are, they're not going to tell you. So try and figure it out for yourself. And the last strategy is the written word. Never, never, never give up on letters, parcels, postcards. They're worth a fortune. Our children, the grandchildren now, they never receive letters. They don't know what will ever feel like to receive a bank statement in the mail. Those of us that are older, my husband used to be deliver the Christmas cards, and bicycle was a school job. They used to put an extra postie on every year just for the Christmas cards. Our grandchildren don't know about this. So never give up on the written word. So those are my strategies. While we can't get in planes as easily, or all of us can, let's make every communication that we have as effective as possible so that the communication is as terrific as it can be.
Thanks, Helen. That was really interesting. And I was struck by the amount of intentionality that you're suggesting. Certainly in my experience, it was a lot more ad hoc than planned in my distance family past. And I'm wondering whether you might be able to help the many people that we're working with at the moment who are moving to New Zealand, either as expats or returning Kiwis. What can they do to set up in advance so that distance family is something that happens successfully for them?
It's really good to think about this. And I really appreciate that those of you thinking of moving or planning, there is so much going on in your brain right now. And putting the family as a priority, I totally get it, that it's just one more layer. But I'd like to suggest, once again, a bunch of little things that you can do, which will make a difference. Because I'm conscious of the fact that even if you're Kiwi coming home, you may be bringing home a non-Kiwi who is now creating the distance family situation at the other end. So what can you do? First of all, ensure that you as a partnership, you are as secure and you're on the same page, because you will be tested much. So that's most important. Tell your parents, your grandparents, as early as possible about the move. Don't have everything organized and then spring it on them. They will never forgive you. You're getting off to a really bad start. Let them be part of the process. In practical terms, there are some things that you can do. If you're coming to New Zealand, start really thinking about the time zone difference and how will it be for the folks back home. Think about what day of the week, if you're coming from, for example, the Americas, it's going to be a different day of the week all the time. That's very disruptive. I understand it. I get it. So start to think about the time zones and start to imagine the time of the day and the day of the week at your end and their end that you're likely to catch up. And why not start a regular FaceTime or Skype or whatever call now before you go and say, okay, likely it's going to be our Saturday afternoon, your Sunday morning. Why don't we just pretend that we're overseas and have a chat? Get them used to the technology, get them used to it. And that'll be really terrific, because it's starting these soft routines before you've even left. Obviously, it's really important that your parents and grandparents are familiar with technology. And, we're all in different categories there. Be super patient and understand that you'll need to tell them more than once. And that's okay. If they're really newbies, you could install Team Viewer app on their iPad, PC, etc. And with Team Viewer, you can go online yourself. and fix anything in their computer. And that's fantastic. My brother does it with my mother, and they only live 5 minutes apart. So it really works well. Explain to the children that they're part of this, that the communication with the family back home is not all up to you as the parents. They are part of it. If they're smart enough to connect with their friends via devices, they're smart enough to connect with their cousins and their aunts and their uncles and their grandparents. And just say, once a week or once a month or whatever, we expect you to initiate a call with your grandparents and have that one-on-one call and just say, this is what our family does. So get those routines going. And it could be happening before you're going. Have those children having those calls happening now. The other thing I'll add is, hey, kids are kids. Some kids are really devoted to this communication thing and just adore their grandparents. Well, of course, we'll do this. And some aren't. And it's not they don't like them. They're just not that kind of kid. So I've soon learned that some are better than others. And just a side note, just appreciate that your left behind siblings are gold and treat them accordingly. Your move is not their choice. And talk to them about it in advance, because they're going to be really important to you down the track. And I'd also offer you some information I've learned from talking with many distance grandparents. Is don't assume that this move is all bad news and won't be good for your family. I have met many, many distance parents and distance grandparents who consistently say the best relationships they have are with their family that's furthest away, because they make the greatest effort. So don't feel that it's all bad, because it might not be. That would be my advice.
That's a nice positive note, Helen. And that,
Yes,
living distant is not being second best in terms of family. It's just a different way of being a family.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and I think this segues nicely into what I was going to ask you next, which is that one of the things that really struck me about your book, and I think you speak from a real place of authority, given your personal and professional experience of distance grandparenting, is the stories that you've elicited from other distant grandparents, a number of which you share throughout the book. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just doing a little reading for us, sharing one of your favourite stories and letting us know what you learned from that particular
Mm.
story.
Well, Bridget asked me to think about this in advance, and that was actually really hard because there's lots of stories. So I've actually chopped and changed a couple of times, but I settled on a story about a dog. And the dog is called Willow. And this is around a distance grandparenting couple who live in a provincial town in New Zealand. And they've been doing it a long time. Their grandchildren are in their early 20s and they live in Germany. They have 3 adult sons, 2 live in New Zealand with children, and 1 lives in Germany with children. And I won't tell you the story about how the son in Germany totally lost his memory with a brain tumor, and the mother went over and helped him in his country. She didn't speak the language. You can buy the book for that one. But let me tell you a lovely story. So I explain in my book that I have often stayed with these distant grandparent friends, and I call them Rhonda and Colin. And it was during these visits that I was introduced to their corgi dog called Willow. She was an important part of their daily routine, and the devotion from them and the dog in return was evident. My husband and I, despite our ambivalence towards pets, I'm not a petty person, I admit that, we took a liking to Willow. Rhonda and Colin explained to me what Willow meant to their in-country children, their local grandchildren, and their distance grandchildren. Colin said to me, a couple of nights ago, when the local family returned from overseas, one of the grandsons, all he wanted to know was, how's Willow? And then Rhonda, the wife, said, and every dog we've ever had has been very important to all the grandchildren. We're on to our 3rd dog now with our grandchildren. Colin and Rhonda have had a few house moves along the way as well. So while their home hasn't been a consistent anchor for their grandchildren, Willow has provided an agency of stability. Willow is a steadfast place of their distance familying. It came as a shock just 3 weeks after my research visit when I received an email reading, Willow died yesterday. She had a liver collapse. We're a bit distraught about her, but we'll get ourselves together soon. Even as a non-doggy person, I was upset. A few weeks later, I asked Rhonda how the extended family had reacted and how they were coping with Willow's passing. In her email back to me, she wrote, "The answer is the grandchildren were very upset. The 3 local ones were on a yacht in the Pacific and were really upset. Susan, our distant granddaughter, sent an email of sympathy from Europe along the lines of a death in the family, enumerating Willow's nice characteristics. Stuart, their distant son, was very upset, and the local New Zealand family was supportive because they had had the same thing, a death of a pet, just a year ago." What Rhonda says, death in the family was the theme. Everyone was very upset we were not going to get another dog. They should have known better. And so should we. In due course, dog number 4 called Breezy was acquired, which is met with approval from all quarters. Willow and now Breezy are steadfast anchors and non-negotiable conduits of the place of Rhonda and Colin's distance family. So what have I learned from that? Well, I've learned you just don't know how this distance grandparenting journey is going to go, or the distance familying journey. We all experience it on different levels, and there are always surprises around the corner. And it's a team effort. Everybody was supportive at that time. Everybody got it. So those are the things I learned. And I suppose there's all sorts of stories. The same family every time a grandchild was born, they planted a particular plant in a pot in the garden. And these pots have gone from house to house and move and move. And it's amazing how the plant later represented the personality of that child. How they knew that when the baby was born, I don't know. So it's the little things that make a difference. So that's my story. I've come to meet Breezy, and Breezy's a very nice dog as well. So hopefully it'll be around for a good few years.
Thanks, Helen. That was a really lovely story, and I liked the way the dog came into it, particularly because for many expat families, having a pet's not a reality. So it's something grandparents can do that parents can't do for them.
Yes, that's true. That's very
so
true.
we're just getting towards the end of our time now. So I really wanted to ask you, what's one most important thing you'd recommend to achieve a successful distance family relationship?
Well, I've got 2, and it's from the different sides of it. The first of all, for the folks back home, the parents, the grandparents, they need to realize that their job is to accept and adjust. And we all do it at a different timetable. Some are really quick and some can take a long time. We raised our children to be go-getters. I said to my kids, you can do anything. And that's exactly what they did. And they got in a plane and lived overseas. So I see it as my responsibility to accept. And that's what I'm wanting my books to do. I'm wanting them to accept in a nice, kind way. The second most important part, and we talked about this, about intentionality. For the families that have gone away, they need to be intentional about keeping in touch. It's not an add-on when it's convenient activity. Well, it can be if you choose, but I don't recommend it is. It's what your family does as best as you can manage in the circumstances. And just remember that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all doom and gloom. It can be a very, very effective move. So those are my 2 points: for the parents to accept and for the away family to be intentional about the communication.
Thank you, Helen. What I'm just going to do now is quickly pop up a slide, because I did want Helen to be able to share with you some information about how to purchase her wonderful book.
So what I've suggested with the book is that each generation of the family have the book. So if you're thinking of, if you're planning to come to New Zealand at the moment, then I suggest to you that you buy a copy yourself, you read it, and then absorb it for yourself, and then give a copy to your folks. the most amazing thing you could do for them is say, I understand you're going to be distance parents and grandparents, and I appreciate your role. And I've read up on it and I understand how it is. That is a courageous thing to do, but can be so beneficial for your move. So to acquire the book, if you go to my website, distancefamilies.com, look for the shop page. You won't be buying it off me, but I've just listed all the most convenient places to buy the book. So it's on all the big platforms, but there's also places where you can order it on the internet, so it's delivered and it's easier for and quicker. It won't be going all around the world. And secondly, to keep in touch, to find out about the additional books that are coming out, just to learn about all the different things that you can do about distance families, go to the Keeping in Touch page on the website. And I'm there on all the social media platforms. I've got articles on LinkedIn here and there, and you can plug in whatever way is convenient for you. So you can just have a little bit of distance family information coming across your page every so often as it suits you. So those are the two pages on the website that you probably find the most useful. Thank you, Bridget.
And you know what I really hope that many of you do who are listening is to watch this either at the same time simultaneously, or at least share this interview with other members of your distance family, so that you can all be on the same page and realize that there's a way to work forward in this sometimes challenging relationship. I've also just popping up there a few contacts for us, so that you can read other material that we produce that's helpful for relocating families. And I wanted to flag to you that we do these expert interviews, such as with Helen, on a regular basis. And our next one coming up is with the head of MIQ, the Managed Isolation Facility exercise in New Zealand. And that's going to be a very interesting subject, because it's something that just about everybody who moves to New Zealand has to go through. Unfortunately, the grandparents at this end don't get to experience it firsthand, which they may be quite happy about, but the kids certainly do.
Yes.
So to maintain contact with us, you can sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of our website page, or we also have a very helpful download Move to New Zealand checklist, which can help you plan your way to get here. So thank you for joining us today, Helen. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and I think it's going to be a really important part of the arsenal for families who are managing their relationships across distance, particularly in the COVID era. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your commitment and research and work to making distance family a successful exercise.
Thank you, Bridget. It's always a pleasure, and I think the next talk is going to be very interesting. Our granddaughter's just arrived home, and she went through MIQ, and it was great. Yeah, it's fascinating whole industry.
Right. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.